All right, let's talk about one of the most, well, jaw-droppingly controversial secret programs in American history. It's called COINTELPRO. This was the FBI's totally illegal operation to disrupt and basically neutralize political dissent. And trust me, it went way further than you can probably imagine.
Okay, to really get how personal and frankly ruthless this program was, just look at this. This is a real, honest-to-God FBI memo. It lays out a plan to completely discredit the actress Jean Seberg. And why? Because she gave money to the Black Panther Party. So what was the big plan? They were going to leak a totally false rumor to gossip columnists that her unborn child was fathered by a member of the Black Panthers. Their own words say the goal was to cause her embarrassment and tarnish her image. I mean, this has nothing to do with national security, right? This is straight-up character assassination.
So how in the world does a federal law enforcement agency end up going after a pregnant actress? Well, to get COINTELPRO, you really have to feel the paranoia of the time. We're talking the Cold War, the 50s and 60s. The FBI, led by its legendary and powerful director J. Edgar Hoover, saw the world through a very specific lens. You know, things like civil rights protests or anti-war demonstrations. To you and me, that's the First Amendment in action. To them, it was a potential threat, the seeds of subversion, and they almost always connected it, at least in their minds, to communist influence.
And their solution, which was completely unconstitutional, by the way, was COINTELPRO. It's short for Counterintelligence Program. It ran, officially at least, from 1956 all the way to 1971. And what was it? Basically a whole bunch of secret projects designed to, and I'm quoting the FBI's own chilling words here, expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize certain groups and people right here in the U.S.
And make no mistake, this was not some sloppy, haphazard operation. No. This was a systematic campaign. It had a crystal-clear mission and a totally ruthless playbook, and the goals were laid out in black and white by the Bureau itself.
So when you look at the official goals, you see this multi-pronged strategy. Step 1, ruin a group's public image. You know, exactly like the plan for Jean Seberg. But it went so much deeper. They wanted to break these groups apart from the inside out. They try to create fights between different activist groups, turning them against each other. They would cut off their money, their public resources. And then the final goal was basically to do whatever it took to stop protests from happening and to scare people so badly they'd never even think about joining. So you see, it wasn't just about spying. It was a full-on blueprint for dismantling a movement from every single angle you can think of.
And this ruthless playbook was used against a really surprisingly wide range of Americans. I mean, when you see who they targeted and the dirty tricks they used, you start to realize just how massive and disturbing this whole thing really was.
Yeah, the sheer variety of targets it's just stunning. Of course, major civil rights groups and the Black Panther Party were huge targets. But the net they cast was incredibly wide. We're talking student anti-war organizers, the American Indian movement, feminist groups, and here's the kicker, even white hate groups like the Ku Klux Klan. The message couldn't be clearer. If the FBI saw you as a political threat of any kind, you could find yourself on their list.
And their tactics? Oh, they were deceptive, they were insidious. Take this document right here. It's actually about an investigation into someone impersonating an agent. And that's because it was a common trick they used themselves. FBI agents would pretend to be journalists or news supporters at a meeting or even members of a rival group, all to stir up trouble and gather intel from the inside. Another huge tactic was illegal surveillance. You're looking at a handwritten worksheet here, analyzing a magnetic tape. This is what it looked like. The FBI planted hundreds of illegal bugs and wiretaps, just completely shredding constitutional protections. And probably their most famous target was Martin Luther King Jr. He was under a relentless campaign of surveillance. We're talking at least 16 hidden microphones and 8 wiretaps in his homes and hotel rooms, just constant. But the tactics didn't just stop at deceptive. They became outright dangerous. The FBI would use false arrests just to mess with organizations, to disrupt them. Hoover himself wrote that it was, and I quote, immaterial whether facts exist to substantiate the charge. Think about that. That's a direct attack on due process. They turned informants into weapons, sending them in not just to spy, but to actively stir up violence. One informant was even involved in the horrible attacks on the Freedom Riders. And in some cases, the FBI would actually support violent right-wing groups just to create chaos and clashes with anti-war protesters. So you have to wonder who was driving all of this. And to really get COINTELPRO, you have to get the culture that J. Edgar Hoover built at the FBI. This wasn't just some out-of-control bureaucracy. It was a direct reflection of one man's incredible power and his paranoia, carried out by a tight inner circle of deputies who were fiercely loyal and saw the world exactly the way he did. Right at the heart of that circle
was a man named Cartha Deke DeLoach. He was the #3 guy at the FBI, Hoover's most trusted lieutenant. And in his own book, he's painted as the ultimate insider, the guy who knows the unblemished truth. And looking at it from his perspective is so important because it shows us that the FBI leadership didn't see what they were doing as illegal. Not at all. They saw it as a necessary defense of the nation, and that belief trickled down through the entire organization.
And this is where the official story and the reality really collide. Let's just take the campaign against Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. If you ask the FBI insiders, they'd tell you they were just protecting national security. They truly believed King was being influenced by communists and that made him a threat. But then you look at the official record, what the Senate's Church Committee found after investigating all this, and it tells a totally different story. The committee concluded the real reason for the campaign was Director Hoover's deep personal dislike for Dr. King. They literally called it a personal vendetta.
And if you need any proof of just how personal that was, you don't have to look any further than Hoover's own handwriting. In 1963, when Time magazine named Dr. King Man of the Year, Hoover got the press release and scribbled this note on it. They had to dig deep in the garbage to come up with this one. Wow, it just doesn't get more personal than that.
Now, a program this secret, this illegal, you just know it can't stay buried forever. And the way it got exposed was almost as dramatic as the program itself. But it raises a huge question, one that we're still grappling with today. Even though the program was officially shut down, did the tactics ever really go away?
Okay, so the whole thing came crashing down on one night, March 8, 1971. A group of activists who called themselves the Citizens Commission to Investigate the FBI broke into a small FBI field office in Pennsylvania. They weren't there for money. They were there for files. They took every single document in the office. They had a hunch something was deeply wrong, and they were determined to find the proof.
And boy, did they find it. The documents they took were the smoking gun, the first hard evidence of this program, COINTELPRO. They started mailing copies anonymously to journalists. Now, most papers were too scared to touch them, but the Washington Post ran the story. And just like that, the secret was out. Once it was public, J. Edgar Hoover's hand was forced. He had no choice but to officially shut down COINTELPRO just a month later.
In the years that followed, Congress finally stepped in and investigated. And the final report from the Church Committee? Well, it was a bombshell. A complete indictment not just of the FBI, but of the entire system. It basically said that for years, Congress and the White House had completely failed to keep an eye on the intelligence agencies, and that failure allowed them to break the law over and over again. It was a massive systemic failure of checks and balances.
So COINTELPRO officially ended in 1971. But its ghost, that seems to linger. I mean, just look at this timeline. Fast forward to 2011, and we find out the FBI was monitoring the Occupy Wall Street movement from day one. Then in 2020, FBI agents show up at a state employee's home to question her about a draft bill she talked about on a private Zoom call. The targets are different, the technology has changed, but the tactics, they feel eerily familiar, don't they?
And critics will tell you there are plenty of other examples that sound a lot like the COINTELPRO playbook. Things like using informants to infiltrate environmental groups or Muslim communities, sometimes even pushing them towards crimes. Or the fact that we've seen decades-long surveillance of Pulitzer Prize-winning journalists. And of course, the widespread monitoring of modern movements for racial justice and against war. The argument here is pretty simple. The name COINTELPRO might be gone, but the playbook is still very much in use.
And all of this leaves us with the big, central question of the whole story. A question that's just as important today as it was back in 1971. Where is the line? Where do we draw that line between protecting national security and just politically repressing people who disagree with the government? Because the history of COINTELPRO is a chilling reminder of just how easily that line can be blurred or erased completely.